Hey there, guys. Alright, today we are back with some more of the Great War. This time, on to week 91, the muddy graves of Russia and Kut. Before we dive in though, make sure you go and check out the links in the description box below. I would love it if you joined the Discord and followed me over at Twitch. Okay, I feel like there's gonna be a lot of death in this episode. Hopefully we don't see any horse guts like we did in the last... I'm fairly certain that was horse guts in the last Great War episode. That was pretty gross. But anyways, let's go ahead and dive right in.
The spring floods had come to the world, and as we see on several fronts, when the floodwaters come, you have but two choices. You adapt or you die.
I choose death.
I'm Indy Nidell. Welcome to the Great War. Last week, the British relief force on the Tigris River pushed back the Ottomans, but was unable to break through and relieve the army under siege at Kut.
Oof.
The major Russian offensive around Lake Narok ended with the Russians taking over 100,000 casualties in total, 5 times more than the Germans. And on the western front at Verdun, the week was marked by a new German push that degenerated into a 5-day artillery war. Here's what came next. In
Yummy. Artillery wars. Woo.
Mesopotamia, it was the now familiar story of disappointment.
Whoa. What all my exes have said.
Floodwaters of the Tigris had hemmed in the advancing British relief forces to a narrow strip of land where only frontal assaults were possible. And since they had failed on the east bank of the river, they now tried on the west, on the 15th and 17th, to break through the Beit Aissa trenches in front of the lines of Es-Sin. But all progress was soon negated by Ottoman counterattacks. Then on the east bank at Sana-Iyat, the British were forced back half a kilometer on the 19th. They tried one last time to break through there on the 22nd, but it was really a lost cause, and it looked like just another depressing failure for the relief force. The Turks had fought them to a standstill, and they had taken in total 23,000 casualties, almost twice as many men as were under siege in Kut.
Jeez.
The following day, the SS Julnar
Kind of reminded me of the Austrian siege that I forget the name of. That took up all of like 1914 and 1915. How the Austrians just sent like hundreds of thousands of more people to their deaths than there were people surrounded in that fort, and they still didn't even get to the people in the fort.
failed to break through the river blockade and supply the besieged. Julnar was a paddle steamer carrying 15 volunteers and 270 tons of food.
That's a lot of fucking food. Holy shit.
By Lieutenant Colonel Cowley and Lieutenant H.O.B. Furman, they were caught in the Turkish steel wire river defenses and taken prisoner. Cowley was executed. Furman died in captivity. Now, in Kut itself, Charles Townshend's soldiers had first been reduced to eating their horses and eventually taking opium pills to stop the hunger pangs. The British had actually begun dropping supplies into Kut by air, the first time aircraft had been used like that. But the amounts that could be flown in by those primitive machines were of no real practical assistance to Townshend and his men, and time was running out. But if the Turks were successful there, they were anything but successful further west. The Russian advance on the Caucasus front continued as the Russians took the major Turkish Black Sea port of Trabzon. Coming not too long after the fall of Erzurum, this was another big victory for the Russians. Russian General Nikolai Yudenich had split his forces, so one group had just taken a major supplying point. The other group made advances upon Bitlis, which was the gateway to Mesopotamia and central Anatolia. If the Russians could take that, they could then possibly split the Ottoman Empire in half and even link up with British forces coming from the Suez Canal and Egypt, trapping Ottoman forces between them. And Russia needed this victory. Over the past 5 weeks,
I have a feeling Russia is not going to get that victory.
They had sent hundreds of thousands of men into battle on the Eastern Front, taking many times the losses that the German and Austrian enemy did. The reason for the haste was to try and gain new and better positions before the spring thaws came. And guess what? They had come. The roads in many places were now rivers of mud. Creeks and rivers were now torrents and flooded their banks, making many roads impassable even to infantry, and large mass movement was impossible, and you certainly couldn't shift any artillery and heavy ammunition either. There was still fighting the whole time, but it was primarily things like scouting detachments fighting each other, and almost all on a small scale. By this week, the ice had all broken up in the north, and the floods had at least stopped rising. And in places like the Pripyat marshes, both sides now made considerable activity by boat. Here's a description from a correspondent of the Russian paper Ruskoye Slovo. The marshes have awakened from their winter sleep. Even on the paved roads, movement is all but impossible. To the right and left, everything is submerged. But however difficult the operation, the war must be continued, and material obstacles must be overcome. Sentries and patrols move in boats. Reconnoitering parties travel in boats. Fire on the enemy in boats. And escape in boats. The Great Marshy Basin is full of new boats called baidaka, constructed to hold 3 or 4 men. The boats are flat-bottomed and steady. Men carried them on
Well, at least they're steady, right? That's what matters.
their shoulders, and when they came to deep water, just threw them down and paddled to the other side. The water was everywhere, and rivers now stretched out to the horizon, and men paddled and punted all over them in eerie silence. In spite of this, there were attempts at regular warfare. At the beginning of the week, the Russians tried several attacks on the army group Prince Leopold of Bavaria in the Servetch River region. These were unsuccessful, as were scattered German attacks. On April 15th, the Germans attacked with artillery and poison gas, but couldn't get anywhere, and for the rest of the week, it was mainly artillery versus artillery. However, at the end of the week, the German scouting parties across the river Shara, north of the Oginsky Canal, were surrounded and annihilated. It seems weird to talk about such small numbers on the Eastern Front when, for the past few weeks, we've been talking about offensives that involved 500,000 men. But at the moment, the big numbers were on the Western Front at the Battle of Verdun. Now 2 months old, there was no end in sight. And this week was business as usual, with the Germans bombarding Avocaur Wood and Côte 304, and the French advancing near Morton. But hey, since I just talked about the Russians, I'm going to mention them again here. During April, the Russian 1st and 2nd Brigades, 18,000 men strong, landed at Marseille in France for service on the Western Front. And they had gone the long way around, the Trans-Siberian Railway, then Singapore, then across the Indian Ocean to the Suez Canal, and across the Mediterranean. Also in France this week,
That's a really long way around. Holy fuck.
on the 20th, a special air squadron was formed, built around 180 American citizens who had volunteered to fight Germany. Called the Lafayette Escadrille, it would shoot down upwards of 200 German planes, while losing only 51 of its volunteers. I'll turn my attention now from the skies to the seas. On April 20th, the merchant steamer Aud attempted to land off the coast of Ireland. It was, in reality, a disguised German ship. Now, since the beginning of the war, the Irish nationalist Sir Roger Casement had been pressing the Germans to use
Man, 1960. I wonder how he dies. I wonder what historical event in Ireland happens in 1916 that would cause this man to die.
the potential of an Irish rebellion against Britain. Now, at his doing, the Aud traveled with 20,000 rifles, 10 machine guns, and 1 million rounds of ammo. It was intercepted by a Royal Navy sloop and scuttled itself rather than have the cargo captured. Now, Casement himself went from Germany to Ireland by sub and landed in an inflatable raft. 4 days later, he was caught and was eventually executed for treason.
Oh, I guess he didn't die as in part of the Easter Rising. Dang.
And here's a random note and some numbers to end the week.
Easter Rising, yeah, the Easter Rising happens in 1916.
On April 19th,
I'm
German
remembering
Field
things
Marshal
right.
von der Goltz died and was possibly assassinated by an Albanian officer, but he died in Asia Minor. And now because you asked, in the fighting last year, 1915, more than 7,000 Indian soldiers had been killed on the Western Front, 1,700 at Gallipoli, and more than 29,000 in Mesopotamia. According to Martin Gilbert, 850,000 Indian soldiers left India during the war.
Damn.
49,000 of them were killed in action. India manufactured
Oh, wait. They sent 850,000, but only 49,000 of them. That's pretty good numbers. In perspective of everything else? Well, it depends on how many died in India, though. Like, were there what issues were plaguing the Indian homeland? you know.
More than 555 million bullets and over 1 million shells, and 55,000 Indians served in the labor corps as bakers, butchers, shoemakers, and so forth, often within range of enemy guns. And the week comes to an end. British desperation in Mesopotamia, the Russians taking Trabzon, and scattered action on both the eastern and western fronts. And floods sabotaging the eastern and Mesopotamia fronts. You couldn't count on traditional transport there, could you? Or regular artillery. So
I feel like you can't really count on much in this war.
what could you count on? Well, there were two things you could always count on.
Death.
And so I'm going to end with a poem, The Kiss by Siegfried Sassoon, an ode to the bullet and the bayonet. To these I turn, in these I trust, brother lead and sister steel. To this blind power I make appeal, I guard her beauty clean from rust. He spins and burns and loves the air, and splits a skull to win my praise. But up the nobly marching days, she glitters naked, cold and fair. Sweet sister, grant your soldier this, that in good fury he may feel the body where he sets his heel, quail from your downward darting kiss. Your two best friends. Poetry was not the only art form used to express what had happened during the war, people's emotions, and, how they felt about things in general. If you're interested in the artwork of World War I, you can check out our special episode.
And that was The Muddy Graves of Russia and Kut, The Great War, week 91. This was this was a good week. Interesting week. Things happening. They've definitely gotten better at, I would say, riding these slower weeks where stuff is happening, but nothing really consequential, I would say, has happened, right? Things progressing, but nothing really being resolved or pushed forward all that much in a truly meaningful way. They've gotten better, I feel like, at least this far in, they've gotten much better at conveying this information to make it interesting, because in 1914 and early parts of 1915, when we had these type of episodes, they were so dull for me. They were so boring to me. But this one was good. So I hope you guys enjoyed as well. Remember to hit that like button and subscribe for more. And I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace.